Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. These are the Graying Jedi Chambers. I am Urza Master. Joining me as always, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas and Lord Uther. Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome. And today, we welcome an old friend back to Tatooine, our beloved Mando, in the Return of the Mandalorian in the Book of Boba Fett. Some interesting things going on here. I don't want to steal any thunder from Psyllium Maas. Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, walk us through the Return of the Mandalorian.
Thank you, Jedi Master Urza Master. Thank you, Jedi Master Lord Uther. Thanks to all of you loyal subscribers and Padawans, Sentinels, Sith, and everyone who is making Graying Jedi such a force in your entertainment needs. Yes, indeed. We're going sideways to the future. In Star Wars, The Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 5, The Return of the Mandalorian. That's right, The Return of the Mandalorian. And we don't just get Din Djarin in this episode. We have a lot of old friends and favorites making appearances here. In fact, what we don't actually have in Chapter 5 of the Book of Boba Fett is any Boba Fett. But I'm going to explain how that was most likely by design and not by accident. So yes, Pedro Pascal returns. We have Emily Swallow returning as the Armorer. We have Jon Favreau as the uncredited voice of Paz Vizsla. And we have Amy Sedaris as Pelimoto with her delightful pit droids and other mechanical aids in Mos Eisley. But how did this come to be, you ask? How, with only a few chapters left in Boba Fett's story, did we suddenly take this unusual side tangent? Well, again, part of it was by design. Director Bryce Dallas Howard and writer Jon Favreau had a few tricks up their sleeves. You'll remember Bryce. She is Ron Howard's daughter and my brother's scene partner in 1991's Backdraft. She's already been in the Star Wars universe with directing The Mandalorian. We first saw Bryce's work behind the camera for Chapter 4, Sanctuary, in Season 1 of the Mandalorian. We talked about that on Graying Jedi Episode 20. And then she returned in the second season for Chapter 11, The Heiress, which introduced us to Bo-Katan Kryze and her fellow Mandalorians, seeking to reclaim glory on their home world that had been devastated by the Empire's Night of 1,000 Tears. And we talked about The Heiress on Graying Jedi 25. Wait, you say, I haven't yet seen Graying Jedi's 20 or 25? Friends, that's why we have archives. That's why we want you to continue to subscribe, and that's why we want you to check out what we said about Bryce Dallas Howard. She does a good job behind the camera. So this is her first chapter of Boba Fett, and she decided to stay familiar and work with characters and plot lines that she had previously graced. Now, I think there's sort of two reasons. There's kind of the above board reason that we ended up where we were here, and then there's kind of this sneaky fan rumor gossip that has never been substantiated, but certainly made its appearances around this time. And here's what I mean. The last actual Mandalorian episode, where Luke Skywalker rescued our friends from Moff Gideon's Dark Troopers and took Grogu off to learn the ways of the Force, that aired on December 18th, 2020. Chapter 5, The Return of the Mandalorian, aired on January 26th, 2022. So basically almost 13 months have passed since we've seen Din Djarin and Grogu and anybody related to their escapades. The Season 3 premiere of The Mandalorian, which will be coming up on the Graying Jedi later this year, friends. You're going to want to see our next season's recap of this show. It actually did not premiere, if we can leap forward into the future briefly, till March 1st of 2023. So basically, since we've last seen The Mandalorian, we won't actually get a full recounting of his tale for almost 2.5 years. And that's an eternity for fans who have watched Grogu and R2-D2 and Luke Skywalker disappear into a turboshaft elevator. What's going on? What happened to my favorite Star Wars streaming characters? And I think part of that was this consideration, was that they knew they couldn't start a new season for at least another year. It had already been over a year since they'd been on there, and I think they did want to kind of take this opportunity and give us The Mandalorian season 2.5. So that's one answer. The unsubstantiated fan rumors at the time was by the time they had finished season 2 of The Mandalorian, Pedro Pascal was in high demand and had been approached for everything from Nicolas Cage co-starring with him in motion pictures, the unbearable talent. I forget the exact wording of it, but it's a very funny film. You can find it on most streaming platforms. The unbearable lightness of talent, or something like that. And HBO's The Last of Us had signed him. And in particular, that role was appealing to Pedro because, well, he gets to actually not act in a suit of armor. And it's not primarily a glorified voiceover. So there was a little friction reported from multiple fan sources. Take that for what you will, because these are all people who say, I know a guy who know a guy who heard. But apparently there was some back and forth between Pedro and the producers in terms of, I want to go do some of these other things and, all of that. Obviously, because The Mandalorian, he was in first position on that show, there's sort of an unwritten rule that they get to dictate the schedule. They get to say when we're going to be shooting and when we need you, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, it is, again, highly speculative, but there might be a kernel or truth, depending on your point of view, that they actually sort of launched the Book of Boba Fett as sort of a safety net in case they weren't able to fully retain Pedro Pascal going forward. And so there were, again, rumors that as much as they wanted creatively to explore this chapter post Return of the Jedi, that this might have been sort of to show him, hey, if you want to go, then we'll just go do other things. And, anyways, that's never actually been acknowledged. All parties found a way forward. And we'll talk more about Pedro Pascal's involvement in season 3 when we cover season 3 here on The Graying Jedi. But that's kind of, when there's smoke, maybe there was a little bit to the brush fire. Maybe it was overblown, or, these things are just part of the normal ebb and flow of Hollywood deal making and so forth. But for once, like a comic book, and you've seen this all the time if you've read the Marvel Star Wars runs in 1977 and 2015, where you might take an issue and just stop telling a particular storyline and just go do, a guest starring role or a tangent. And in this case, we were left in the previous chapter 4 with Boba Fett saying, we need manpower. We're on war against the Pike Syndicate. And Fennec Shand says, well, we can find, you can find muscle, provided the right price. And then, of course, they played us the Mandalorian theme, Ludwig Göransson's classic Western minimalist theme. And we're like, ooh, I think we're going to get a little return. And that's exactly what Chapter 5 turns out to be. So what's he been up to? Well, he's returned to his full-on bounty hunting ways. And when we catch up with Din Djarin, he's in a meat market trying to collect. And it's almost exactly like we saw him in the Chapter 1. He'll bring him in warm or he'll bring him in cold. Only this time he's got the Darksaber, which of course he retrieved from Moff Gideon, and which Bo-Katan craves in order to rightfully assume the throne of Mandalore. So he's using the dark saber and he's slicing his opponents in twain, and beheading them and collecting their, which leads to one of Bryce Dallas Howard's just a fantastic sight gag, and it's done in an unusually long, simulated take, looking like it's like a single camera shot, but it kind of starts with Din Djarin getting into an elevator, a public elevator on this space station, and he's just beheaded his bounty, and he's holding it like in a sack, and it's clearly that's kind of what it looks like. I mean, anybody who put two and two together could figure it out. And there's just an unfortunate alien standing on the elevator with him, and kind of looks down like, is that what I think that is? And then Mando looks over at him like, are you going to say something? And the alien like turns away. Oh, I didn't see anything. Like it's just a great silent visual gag that plays very well. And again, what we've said about Bryce Dallas when she takes her turns, whether she's doing the creatures that had the eggs that she introduced that subplot in season 2, whether she's doing the farmers who are being beset by the marauders in her Seven Samurai homage in season 1, like she does like to find human elements in these stories, much like her father, and she does like to play those beats. It's not simply choreographed stunts and fight sequences and exposition. So if you are familiar with her and her style, it's very apparent as you're watching that this is something that you wouldn't even need to know the credits beforehand to know, oh yeah, Bryce Dallas Howard must have directed this. But basically, this is basically just an episode to A, reestablish the Mando and his world, and B, lay out some groundwork for where season 3 is likely to go. He's been, banished from his from the Mandalorians for removing his helmet in season 2 a couple of times, and he's still got this dark saber that he's not 100% comfortable with. And we still don't know what's happened to Grogu, who's off learning the ways of the Force with Jedi Master Luke Skywalker. He doesn't have a ship. The Razor Crest was obliterated in season 2 by Moff Gideon. So it's basically just kind of setting the framework for, again, where we'll see the Mando in the upcoming chapters. And gentlemen, this was very controversial because people thought, well, what's going on? Like, why is Boba Fett not in a Boba Fett episode? I think, even if you cast aside all of the behind the scenes stuff, I really, really think it works in the sense that A, it's a well told chapter of story, and you can agree or disagree on that point on the council. But B, I mean, it, like a good comic book, like I say, like it's more of a side story, or it sort of just, it doesn't erase the current storylines with Boba and Fennec Shand that we've been following. And in fact, Fennec Shand does drop in for a cameo literally at the end of the episode to tie it all back together. But I just think that this was, it's a big umbrella. It's a big multi-connected universe. And we've talked about Dave Filoni's plans to bring all of these elements together in a feature film, in the next 3 or 4 years. Ahsoka, the upcoming Skeleton Crew, characters from the Book of Boba Fett, the Mandalorian and Grogu, this even beyond Favreau's announced Mandalorian and Grogu picture, this team up, if you will, this Justice League of the Filoniverse. I mean that should be something that gets fans kind of excited because, like I say, they're all kind of bumping heads and crossing paths here post Return of the Jedi, pre-sequel trilogy, and that's kind of like I say, the galaxy's big enough to not just be so restrictive and like, oh, we can't have the Mandalorian in another show. I personally, for me, I was very happy with this episode, even when the fans were taking to their keyboards and expressing their dismay. What did the council think about getting a chance to run with Din Djarin and Peli Motto and all of the prequel nods, the new N1 starfighters and things that you're. How did it play, guys? How did it land?
I was surprised how much I liked this episode. I don't know that it was like I missed Mando, or if I missed Emily Swallow's The Armorer. I'm not sure. I liked the swerve. I liked a little background on what happened, after the end of season 2 Mandalorian, and it kind of made it make a little sense. How did he find himself back on Tatooine and why? Obviously he needed a ship. He didn't have Boba and Slave One to kind of take him places to hunt his bounties, so he's flying commercial. Like, there's some really funny, like, just asides. The little Greedo-looking alien kid that like sees him and then sees him in the Starfighter. I mean, our favorite
Right.
X-wing captain. That was
Carson Teva.
just a funny exchange. Getting pulled over and then. Mando being Mando, telling the truth, and then he's just like, I don't have time for this. Woof! Flying off at like really fast sublight speed. I really had a lot of fun with this episode. I don't regret that there was no Boba Fett. I thought I would. Watching it going through, I was like, I'd heard the flack that this episode got. A lot of the criticisms of this series that I'd heard before I watched it were that, partway through they just sort of gave up on Boba Fett. I don't find that to be the case. Like, this sort of makes sense given the history from season 2 Mandalorian to Boba Fett. Like, to bring these two together, I mean, obviously they're franchise characters. You can't just simply be like, hey Mando, I need you. This is the way, I'll be right there. Yeah, that's not gonna work. Like, you gotta have something that ties the two together. And I thought Ming-Na as Fennec in this episode was excellent. Getting in behind the defenses at the spaceport, body shop. I thought that was clever. The Womp Rat beating up on the droid that she's hunting with her blunderbuss. Like, I mean, there's just so much fun that happened in this episode. It felt like kind of a nice break. Not that Boba hasn't had a bunch of fun as part of the show, but it kind of injected. I don't know. I've always felt like Mandalorian was a little bit more lighthearted in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because every episode's going to end on some kind of a happy, good ending note. Boba's a little darker. I mean, it's a little more. It's a redemption story, so it's there's a little bit more heavier subject matter. So this was kind of a nice little mid-season break to, I don't know, bring me back as a fan a little bit. I didn't feel like I was going to see something like knockdown, drag out, Boba going toe to toe with a Wookiee bounty hunter. You know what I mean? No Power Rangers, so that's always a plus. But I don't know. I just I felt like this was almost what Boba Fett, as a show needed to kind of re-energize me, because I was getting a little bit, I knew we were ending the flashback sequences, so I was like, okay, I don't know that there's enough going on in the moment on Tatooine for me to really invest myself in, like, okay, Boba's gonna go solo against an entire crime syndicate. Like, I know he's going to hire muscle, but I'm like, I don't know that I'm going to buy he's just going to go out to, like, the local bar and put a hit out on the Pike Syndicate. Like, that's just not going to work. So there had to be some kind of a bridge there. And this is more than a vehicle, but it's like a uniting of two mighty rivers. So I had a great time watching this.
Yeah, I felt like it worked, it was needed, and it was going to be a bridge into season 3 for Mandalorian. Like, it's like almost all those things needed to happen, in a sense, and it just the idea of him walking into a meat market and just slicing everything up. I don't know what it was about that, but it just seems so apropos for him to do something like that. I also like the idea that one of our superheroes, in a sense, has, like you said, fly commercial. He doesn't have a choice. I love how he downloaded all of his weapons, which I thought that was a kind of a cool moment, because he had to put down the Darksaber, and I really questioned if he was going to get all of that back. So I thought it was interesting that he actually got everything back. I wasn't really expecting that to happen, and that might seem minuscule, but I think it was just another interesting little twist to that. Like, you kind of expect when the superhero loses all their weapons, in a sense, like, probably not going to get them back, and that winds up happening. And they made the N1 fighter cool. I didn't think that was possible, and we talk about redemption or taking things maybe from the prequels and making them relevant or making them fit into the story or whatever it is, and they do it here, even to the point that the ship kind of matched his armor, like the coloring of the ship. And I thought that was very interesting, because I thought no Razor Crest, and I can't watch this anymore. I love that ship. It was like a Millennium Falcon for me, But he takes that N1 and he makes it something cool again. The sequences with the Jawas, which could have been kind of tropey, again, it works. The idea that they can get anything, it's like you're going to the mob, you can get anything, and the Jawas can do that. So this episode, again, needed, advances the story, and allows him to work with Boba Fett. And all it took was, like a 30-second spot at the end, or maybe a minute, and all of a sudden, boom, it all kind of ties together, and they're able to move along. So, great episode.
I think what's great is that you can take those creative chances here. I mean, again, it would have been strange in another show, in another context, to be able to take that leap. But here, like we say, it's a big enough galaxy that they can kind of afford to do it. And I think the exciting part is that we also, I mean, like I say, you couldn't ask, if you've gazed into the future using your Force abilities, you couldn't ask for a more concise sort of what is the roadmap forward. I mean, all of the setup, well, you showed your face, you are no longer, bound by creed, you're an apostate, you're a pariah, you are no longer Mandalorian. And then we have to sort of set that aside as he goes through the rest of the beats and is going to, volunteer his muscle for Boba and Fennec's crusade. But I mean, that's heavy stuff, right? I mean, there's nothing that means more to his identity than being Mandalorian and being a part of this culture. And to just be summarily dismissed, after battling Paz Vizsla, who started off as a rival, then became an ally, and is now, basically was ready to kill him for possession of the Darksaber. That whole sequence, that's pretty much the action equivalent here. We don't, you get the fight in the meat market, and you get the duel with Paz Vizsla for control of the saber, and then that's it, right? It is a little heavy, and at least it kind of tells us, hey, put a pin in this one, because this is not going to be an easy resolution. And in terms of retrofitting the N1, again, not only are we doing what Jedi Master Lord Uther is saying in terms of, resurrecting and redeeming some of those qualities that some, may not have embraced the first go around, but it also says something centrally to, again, the George Lucas vision. He always thought of TIE fighters and X-Wings as like, auto racing and, pod racing, and he'd go all the way back to American Graffiti and his love with cars and cruising in Modesto and so forth. And here we get a montage of basically fixing up that car in the garage, right? I mean, it's up on blocks. Let's put this in. Let's give it a new coat of paint. Let's, put some, modify the engine so it goes really, really fast. And that's, like I say, that goes all the way back to George Lucas, obsessed with the sheer mechanics of it. He always said that the rebels were using these model car kits that they just put together with spit and polish and chewing gum and baling wire, while the Empire was using state-of-the-art, high-end, factory model, fresh, rolled off the assembly line, equipment. And this is, sort of a callback to that sort of, rough and rebel spirit, taking this symbol of the old republic and, like I say, putting a new spin on it, and so forth. And yes, the traffic stop, driving while Mandalorian from the X-wings, and Mando just punches it and spins off, and they, in the past, Carson Teva and Trapper Wolf would like chase him. And they're just like, yep, forget it. It's not today. You want to fill out the paperwork, which is exactly how law enforcement probably feels, like it's not so much is this a life and death situation. It's, am I going to get stuck behind a desk the rest of the day filling out forms? And I think
is it,
you can appreciate.
or is that actually a little bit of this idea of they're not taking the extra step to keep the Republic the way it should be? Right?
There you go.
I don't want to do it, so I'm just going to ignore it. So how many other things are they ignoring? And it's kind of like when I walk into a place, and this is going to sound weird, but I see some dust, and I go, well, if they're not doing this, what else are they not doing? Right? And because it all kind of builds upon itself, and you have issues in other spots. And when I saw that, I'm like, ooh, it may sound trivial, or it may seem trivial, but is it? Because are you taking all those appropriate steps? So I don't know what you guys think about that.
That's a good
That's
point.
good.
We've questioned the New Republic before. What brings rise to the First Order? New Republic. Could it be some flaw? Is this the dust that triggers the Womp Rat problem? Well, we'll find out. But as far as this episode of Book of Boba Fett is concerned, gentlemen, what kyber crystal color does your lightsaber fire for the return of the Mandalorian? Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, how about you?
I have in my hand here a United States Postal Certified Mail receipt, coincidentally from the IRS, and it's a light green, sea moss green, sage green, if you will, and so, as you know, I do like my Star Wars episodes green. This one, like I say, it's a little off the beaten path, but I don't think that is a bug. I think it's a feature, and I am going to support the creative vision. And you'll see, if you get to the end of it and said, what was all that about? Well, then they didn't do their jobs. But as we are here right now, 5 chapters into the story, let's see where it takes us, and let's see what further revelations, cliffhangers, and surprises come forward. You're not going to want to miss this, Graying Jedi fans. Absolutely stay tuned to the Graying Jedi podcast to learn what happens next. And one quick final note, just to pick up on my fellow council members' points just now. The Empire only truly was in effect from Clone Order 66 to the destruction of the first Death Star at the Battle of Yavin for roughly 30 years, which this episode takes pains to establish. And you think about that, that's not an extremely long time for the galaxy to descend into total totalitarianism and authoritarianism. And that was interesting, because then you wonder what's the shelf life of the New Republic, which again goes on to the rise of the First Order and this endless cycle that we're trying to break here as Graying Jedi. And so that's interesting, that so much damage and harm and conflict came out of just what in the cosmos must seem an insignificant speck, that those 30 years of Palpatine's oppression. So I thought that was interesting that they mentioned that. So let's go sage green for chapter 5.
Well, I give this one my seal of approval with a green lightsaber.
Very nice.
Hello.
Very nice.
Great episode, but something that Jedi Master Psyllium Maas brings up, which I think is a good point or question. wasn't the Old Republic around for like 10,000 years or something like that? And then you're seeing these just 30-year pieces almost where like the Empire's ruling and then First Order's there, or I mean then the New Republic and then the First Order, and now what happens after that? It's just weird how you had all these years of peace, and now things are like in this really weird cyclical pattern of being overthrown all the time. So, as always, another great point. Well, there, Jedi Urza Master of Masters, what do we got?
I am going to give this my seal of approval as well with the Arizona tea green. I really enjoyed the episode. I thought it was a lot of fun. I also thought it gave us quite a bit of good backstory, which there needed to be some exposition, I think, because, again, they're positioning this as like a supergroup moving into the future of Star Wars and what stories they'll tell from here. It really reminded me of Balin Skull in a big way, of this break the cycle mentality. And I love that can somehow tie everything back to where we started the Graying Jedi podcast, the Ahsoka series. Even though this, predated that, they're really laying out a nice web. And it kind of reminded me of the MCU in a big way. It was like they're setting up a future conflict, a significant one that's going to be compelling television, film, however it happens to happen. So loved it all around. Can't wait to dive into the next episode. On our next episode of the Graying Jedi podcast, this has been episode 35, gentlemen. 35 episodes deep. More to come. There is no shortage of Star Wars. And until we see you again in that galaxy far, far away, the Force be with you.
And also with you two.